During a company dinner, I accidentally bumped into my boss's girlfriend while reaching for my water glass. The contact was nothing, just my elbow grazing her sleeve as I turned, trying to navigate the crowded space between tables. But Lucy Barrett reacted like I'd shoved her off a cliff. Her hand shot up fast, palm open, and cracked across my face so hard my earring flew off and skittered across the polished floor. The sound split through the elegant dining room like breaking glass. Conversations died mid-word. Silverware froze. Someone's champagne flute hit their plate with a sharp clink, then silence. "Watch where you're going, you insignificant little nobody," she screamed loud enough that every person in that restaurant heard each venomous syllable. Her face was crimson, eyes blazing with fury, one perfectly manicured finger pointed at me like I was dirt she'd tracked in on her expensive shoes. The laughter erupted almost instantly. Not polite chuckles or nervous titters, genuine laughter. Natalie from Human Resources threw her head back like it was the funniest thing she'd witnessed all year. Two executives from the acquisitions team were smirking behind their wine glasses. Even the senior vice president at the head table smiled faintly and glanced away, shaking his head as though I'd committed some amusing social blunder. My face burned. I could taste blood where my teeth had caught the soft flesh inside my cheek. I stood frozen, one hand starting to rise toward my stinging skin, trapped in that horrible instant when your mind registers something catastrophically wrong but your body hasn't processed how to respond. Then I saw Donna from compliance weaving through the tables toward me, her expression tight and professional, that practiced look she wore whenever she needed to manage a situation before it became a corporate liability. She grabbed my forearm firmly, not with concern but with the grip of someone removing a problem, and leaned close. "Leave immediately," she whispered just loud enough for me to hear. "We'll address this appropriately." Address what? I wanted to demand. Address the fact that I'd just been physically assaulted in front of 60 colleagues and clients while they laughed like it was dinner theater? But my throat had constricted too tightly to form coherent words. Before I could process anything, before I could move or speak or even breathe properly, my boss Ethan stood from his seat beside Lucy. He straightened his designer tie, cleared his throat with deliberate authority, and fixed me with that glacial stare he reserved for subordinates who'd disappointed him. The one that made you feel about 3 inches tall. "Apologize to Lucy right now," he said, his voice carrying across the hushed restaurant with absolute finality. "Or you can clean out your desk tomorrow morning." Everyone was watching, waiting, the entire room holding its collective breath to see whether I'd collapse under the pressure. The air felt electric, charged with anticipation and judgment. I looked at Ethan, then at Lucy still glaring at me with her arms crossed tightly and her lipstick slightly smeared from the force she'd used to strike me, then at Donna whose hand remained clamped on my arm, already steering me toward the exit like security removing an unruly patron. I didn't apologize. I didn't argue or defend myself or make a scene. I simply pulled my arm free from Donna's grasp, turned on my heel and walked straight out of that restaurant. The heavy door closed behind me with a muted thud, cutting off the immediate surge of whispers that had already begun. I stood on the sidewalk outside beneath the restaurant's elegant awning, under streetlights that made everything look washed out and surreal. My face still throbbed. My vision blurred at the edges. My entire body trembled, not from fear but from pure, crystalline rage. I thought that was it. I thought I'd just walked away from my career, my reputation, possibly my entire professional future in this city. But when everyone returned to the office the following morning, a shocking surprise was waiting for them. Because what none of them knew, what Ethan and Lucy and Donna and every single person who'd laughed at my humiliation didn't realize, was that I hadn't attended that dinner alone. Someone else had been there, sitting quietly at a corner table, observing everything with careful attention. And that person was about to turn their comfortable world completely upside down. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back and show you exactly how one slap at a company dinner destroyed far more than just my face. Before I continue, do me a favor. If you've ever been publicly humiliated by someone who believed they were untouchable, hit that subscribe button and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. I read every single one because what happens next they absolutely never saw coming. My name is Victoria Miles. I'm 34 years old, and until that dinner, I dedicated the previous 7 years of my life to working as a senior operations manager at a consulting firm called Core Strategies Group. We specialized in corporate restructuring and organizational efficiency, helping struggling companies identify problems, eliminate waste, and emerge leaner and more profitable. We weren't the most recognizable name in the industry, but we had solid clients, consistent revenue, and a reputation for delivering results without the inflated fees charged by larger competitors. I wasn't one of the flashy consultants who presented to executives in glass-walled boardrooms or closed million-dollar contracts over expensive lunches. I was the person who made those contracts actually work after they were signed. I built implementation frameworks, managed cross-functional teams, identified bottlenecks before they derailed entire projects, and solved crises at 2 in the morning when everything seemed ready to collapse. I was the invisible infrastructure that kept the entire operation running smoothly while people like Ethan collected credit in rooms I was never invited to enter. Ethan Foster had been my direct supervisor for nearly 4 years. Early 40s, impeccable wardrobe, teeth so white they probably required professional maintenance, the kind of effortless confidence that comes from never experiencing real consequences for anything. He came from money, attended prestigious schools, belonged to exclusive clubs where membership required family connections more than personal merit. He joined Core after a brief tenure at a more prominent firm, brought in specifically to modernize our approach and expand our client base, which mostly meant firing experienced staff over 50 and replacing them with younger employees willing to work weekends without complaining about work-life balance. Ethan was talented at his job, I'll acknowledge that much. He possessed an almost supernatural ability to read rooms, sell visions, and make clients feel like they were receiving revolutionary insights when we were really just applying the same proven methodologies every consulting firm used. He could walk into a meeting with a struggling organization and walk out 2 hours later with a signed contract worth $350,000. That's a valuable skill that generates significant revenue. But he was also the type of manager who'd take your work, reframe it slightly, and present it as his own breakthrough thinking. The kind who'd copy the entire executive team when you made the smallest error but never when you prevented a disaster. The kind who'd smile warmly at you during meetings, then slash your project budget the following day without explanation or discussion. I'd learned to navigate his management style over the years. Keep your head down, produce excellent work, collect your paycheck, avoid creating waves that might draw his negative attention. That survival strategy worked effectively for most employees. You didn't need to admire your supervisor. You just needed to avoid giving them reasons to target you. Lucy Barrett had started appearing around the office approximately 9 months earlier. She wasn't an employee, wasn't a consultant, wasn't officially affiliated with our firm in any capacity. She was simply there at company events, sometimes waiting in the lobby for Ethan with her phone in hand and that particular expression of impatient boredom that suggested the world moved far too slowly for her preferences. At client dinners where spouses weren't typically invited, but somehow she always occupied the seat beside Ethan, always held a glass of wine, always offered unsolicited opinions on topics she clearly didn't understand. She was younger than Ethan by at least 15 years, possibly more depending on how honest she was being about her age. She claimed to work in fashion marketing or brand consulting or something deliberately vague she never quite clarified when people inquired. She possessed that specific brand of entitlement that emerges from dating someone powerful and mistaking proximity to authority for actual authority. I'd witnessed her being dismissive to servers, snapping at Ethan's assistants, interrupting colleagues mid-sentence because she'd grown bored with conversations that didn't center on her interests. Ethan never corrected her behavior, never appeared to notice. He'd simply smile indulgently as though her rudeness was charming rather than toxic, as though she was a spirited thoroughbred instead of someone who treated service workers like furniture. Most people at Core learned to avoid Lucy whenever possible. You could observe them physically tense when she entered rooms, conversations immediately shifting to safer topics, everyone suddenly extremely interested in their phones or their work. Nobody wanted to become the target of her attention. Nobody wanted to risk saying something that might offend her and have Ethan hear about it later that evening. I'd only interacted with her a handful of times before that fateful dinner. Brief exchanges in elevators, polite acknowledgments at company functions. Once when she demanded I move my car in the parking garage because it was allegedly blocking her exit even though there was clearly sufficient space for her to leave without difficulty. I'd moved my car without argument because the confrontation wasn't worth the potential consequences. Nothing substantial. Nothing that would have predicted what happened that night. The firm had reserved a private space at Harrington's, an upscale restaurant downtown, for our annual client appreciation event. These gatherings were designed to make everyone feel valued and important. Premium open bar 5-course tasting menu. Speeches about how our people represented our greatest asset and our unwavering commitment to excellence delivered by executives who wouldn't recognize most employees if they passed them in the hallway. The restaurant was in the financial district, all exposed brick and low lighting and Edison bulbs hanging from the ceiling. The kind of establishment that charges $48 for a steak and makes you feel sophisticated for paying it. The event space they'd reserved occupied the entire second floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city lights, industrial chic decor that probably cost more than my annual salary, round tables with crisp white linens and place cards in elegant calligraphy, a small stage at the front for the inevitable self-congratulatory presentations, a bar along the back wall already crowded with people who'd arrived early to maximize their access to complimentary alcohol. I'd almost skipped the event. These functions always felt performative and artificial, and I had legitimate work demanding attention. A client presentation scheduled for early Monday morning, quarterly reports requiring final review, the kind of tasks that don't respect weekend boundaries or personal time. But my colleague Stephanie had convinced me to attend. "Come on, Victoria," she'd said that afternoon, perched on the edge of my desk. "You never attend these things anymore. People are starting to think you're deliberately antisocial." "I am deliberately antisocial," I'd replied without looking up from my computer screen. "Exactly my point. So prove them wrong for one evening. Show your face, have one drink, leave early if you hate it as much as you expect to." She made a valid argument. I'd declined the previous 4 company events. Eventually, absence becomes a pattern that colleagues notice and interpret. The person who never participates. The person who doesn't care about team culture or building relationships. That's precisely how you end up on the list when budget cuts and workforce reductions begin. So I attended. I wore my charcoal suit, the one that looked professional without appearing like I was trying too hard to impress anyone. Black heels I'd purchased on sale 2 years ago. Simple jewelry that wouldn't draw attention or spark conversation. I arrived exactly on time, which in corporate culture typically means approximately 10 minutes late since everyone else invariably arrives early to network and position themselves strategically. The restaurant was already buzzing with energy when I walked through the doors. Clusters of people holding cocktails, laughing too enthusiastically, voices overlapping in that distinctive rhythm of forced professional camaraderie. I recognized most faces scattered throughout the space. Colleagues from various departments, several key clients, a few board members I'd only encountered in company newsletters and all staff emails. Ethan was holding court near the bar when I arrived, Lucy attached to his side in a dress that probably cost more than 3 months of my rent. Deep emerald green, backless, the kind specifically designed to command attention in a room full of conservative business attire. She held a champagne flute delicately in one hand and wore that perpetually bored expression she always displayed at work functions, as though being there represented some tremendous favor she was bestowing upon everyone present. I collected a glass of wine from the bar, nothing expensive or memorable, just something to hold so I'd look occupied, and found Stephanie near the appetizer display. She was engaged in conversation with someone from finance, both of them sampling tiny portions of something that looked impressively expensive but tasted disappointingly bland. "You actually came," Stephanie said, grinning when she spotted me approaching. "Don't sound so astonished." "I'm always astonished when you do anything remotely social outside mandatory work obligations." We talked for a comfortable stretch of time, cycling through the usual safe topics that fill space without requiring genuine vulnerability or depth. Current projects, weekend plans, the new hire who persisted in microwaving fish in the break room despite multiple complaints and creating an unbearable stench throughout the entire floor every single day around noon. It was fine, easy, the kind of surface-level interaction that makes events like these tolerable. Around me, the evening progressed along its entirely predictable trajectory. People mingled with strategic intent, alcohol flowed freely. Someone from the executive leadership team delivered a mercifully brief speech expressing gratitude for everyone's dedication and hard work, which really meant thanking everyone for making him appear successful and competent. Polite applause rippled through the room, then conversations resumed and appetizers continued circulating. I was starting to believe I might actually survive the entire evening without incident when I decided to refill my wine glass. The bar had become crowded, people standing 3 deep, waving credit cards unnecessarily since everything was complimentary, shouting drink orders to overwhelmed bartenders. I navigated into a narrow gap between two separate conversations, waiting patiently for a bartender to acknowledge my presence. The man to my left was recounting some apparently hilarious story about a golf outing. The woman to my right was laughing with excessive volume at something that probably wasn't remotely as funny as her reaction suggested. I stood there waiting, holding my empty glass, when someone behind me shifted position. I stepped back instinctively, a tiny adjustment to create space and avoid blocking their path, basic courtesy that happens constantly in crowded environments. My elbow made incidental contact with someone else. Barely a brush, the whisper of fabric against fabric. The kind of accidental touch that occurs hundreds of times at every crowded gathering without anyone even registering it happened. I didn't immediately realize who I'd bumped until I turned my head. She stumbled slightly, though the contact had been so minimal it couldn't possibly have thrown off her balance. A few drops of champagne sloshed over the rim of her glass and onto her hand. For one brief moment, I genuinely expected her to laugh it off the way any reasonable adult would when someone accidentally makes minor contact in a crowded space. Instead, her face transformed. Eyes narrowing dangerously, mouth twisting into something ugly and hostile. "Are you serious right now?" she snapped, her voice sharp enough to slice through the ambient noise and draw attention from nearby conversations. I blinked, still clutching my empty wine glass, my brain struggling to process her disproportionate reaction. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean," and then her hand came up and slapped me across the face with such tremendous force that my earring tore free and went flying, my vision momentarily starred, and I actually staggered backward from the impact. The restaurant went silent. Not gradually, instantaneously, as though someone had pressed a mute button on reality itself. I stood there absolutely stunned, my cheek burning with searing pain, my ears ringing from the violence of the blow. I could feel heat spreading rapidly across my face, that sharp stinging sensation that accompanies genuine force behind a strike. My mouth filled with the metallic taste of blood where my teeth had torn the soft tissue inside my cheek. People were staring. Not intervening, not expressing shock or concern, just staring with mouths slightly open, drinks forgotten halfway to their lips, forks suspended in midair. "Watch where you're going, you insignificant little nobody," Lucy screamed with such volume I felt the words physically impact my chest. She was pointing at me now, her face flushed with rage, her other hand still gripping that champagne flute like a potential weapon she might throw next if I didn't retreat fast enough. And then the laughter started. Not from Lucy, from the room, from my colleagues and coworkers. People I'd worked alongside for years. People who'd requested my help on challenging projects, who'd invited me to their birthday celebrations, who'd smiled at me in morning meetings and called me by name. Natalie from Human Resources threw her head back, mouth open wide in genuine amusement. Two executives from Acquisitions were grinning behind their wine glasses, shoulders shaking with barely suppressed laughter. Even the senior vice president at the head table smiled faintly and glanced away, shaking his head as though I'd committed some mildly embarrassing social faux pas rather than being violently assaulted. They thought it was entertaining. I looked around desperately, searching for one person, just a single individual who appeared horrified or outraged. Someone who might stand up and declare that this behavior was completely unacceptable, that you cannot strike someone in public and receive applause for it. Nobody did. Ethan stood near the bar with his arms crossed, observing me with that cold, calculating executive stare he used when evaluating whether someone was worth the trouble they'd created. He didn't look angry at Lucy for her violent outburst. He looked annoyed at me, as though I'd deliberately caused a scene, as though I'd embarrassed him in front of important clients and colleagues by having the audacity to get physically assaulted at his girlfriend's hands. Then I noticed Donna from compliance moving purposefully toward me through the crowd, her expression professionally tight, that carefully practiced mask she wore whenever something needed to be managed before it escalated into a genuine corporate liability requiring documentation and potential legal involvement. She reached me in 4 quick steps and grabbed my forearm, not with concern or care but with the firm grip of someone removing an obstacle that's interfering with the smooth operation of an event. "Leave immediately," she hissed quietly enough that only I could hear over the returning buzz of conversation gradually resuming around us. "We'll address this appropriately through proper channels." Address this appropriately, I thought bitterly. She just committed assault in front of 60 witnesses, And you want me to leave so you can pretend it never happened? But before I could formulate a response, before I could process what was even happening or decide how to react, Ethan spoke up from his position near the bar. "Apologize to Lucy right now," he said, his voice not particularly loud but carrying across the hushed space with unmistakable authority. Calm, commanding, absolutely final in its delivery. "Or you can clean out your desk first thing tomorrow morning." The entire restaurant was watching now, waiting, 60 pairs of eyes locked on me with anticipation, waiting to see whether I'd crumble under the pressure and provide the apology they all expected, the submission that would restore the evening's equilibrium and allow everyone to return to their meals and conversations. Lucy stood there with her arms crossed tightly, smirking slightly as though she'd won some important contest, as though this was a game with clear rules and she'd just captured the winning piece. I could have done it. Could have swallowed every ounce of my pride and dignity, mumbled the apology they demanded, allowed them to sweep this entire incident under the corporate rug like it never occurred. Returned to my table, finished my overpriced meal, pretended my face wasn't throbbing and my colleagues hadn't just laughed at my public humiliation. That's what they expected. That's what people like me always do when confronted by people like them. Keep your head down. Don't create problems. Apologize even when you've done absolutely nothing wrong. Because that's how you survive in corporate environments. That's how you keep your job and your paycheck and your carefully constructed professional reputation. But something inside me broke. Not loudly or dramatically, just a quiet, cold certainty settling into my chest like ice water. I didn't apologize. I didn't argue or defend myself or attempt to explain what had actually happened. I didn't say a single word to anyone in that room. I simply pulled my arm free from Donna's controlling grip, turned deliberately, and walked directly toward the exit with my head held high. Behind me, the whispers erupted immediately, urgent and excited conversations that would transform into the stories people told around the office on Monday morning. "Did you see that? Can you believe she just walked out without apologizing? Ethan's definitely going to fire her for insubordination." I didn't look back even once. The hallway outside the private dining room was bright and sterile and oppressively quiet. The thick carpet absorbed the sound of my footsteps as I moved toward the elevators. I could still hear muffled conversation filtering through the closed doors behind me, the low hum of people already moving past the incident, returning to their meals and drinks and networking conversations as though nothing significant had occurred, as though I hadn't just been physically attacked while they watched and laughed. My hands were trembling violently. Not from fear or anxiety, from pure white-hot rage, the kind that makes your vision narrow and your thoughts become sharp and crystalline and absolutely focused. I walked past the elevators without stopping, past the elegant lobby with its tasteful artwork and expensive furniture, straight through the revolving door into the cool evening air outside. The city hummed around me with complete indifference to whatever personal catastrophe I'd just experienced. I stood there on the sidewalk for several long moments beneath the restaurant's sophisticated awning, trying to regulate my breathing, trying to process everything that had just happened and what it meant for my immediate future. Then I pulled out my phone. I scrolled through my email inbox, past the usual accumulation of work clutter, client requests and meeting confirmations and project updates, until I located the message I'd been deliberately ignoring for nearly 3 weeks. It was from someone named Catherine Wells. I'd never heard of her before that email arrived, but her job title had immediately captured my attention. Senior Investigator, Corporate Ethics and Compliance Division. She'd reached out because she was conducting a confidential investigation into Core Strategies Group. Multiple anonymous complaints had been filed alleging financial irregularities, potential conflicts of interest, possible misuse of client funds and company resources. Nothing concrete or proven yet, just enough smoke to suggest fire burning somewhere underneath the polished corporate surface. She wanted to speak with employees who'd been with the organization long enough to notice patterns, who might possess information that could help construct the larger picture of what was actually happening behind closed doors. I'd read her email when it first appeared in my inbox, considered responding for approximately 45 seconds, then archived it without replying. I didn't want involvement. Didn't want to become the whistleblower who ended up unemployed and professionally blacklisted throughout the entire industry. Corporate investigations are complicated and messy. They drag on for months or even years. And even when they eventually uncover genuine wrongdoing, The executives at the top typically land comfortably on their feet with generous severance packages while everyone else gets sacrificed and blamed. Better to keep your head down, stay completely out of it, let someone else be the hero willing to risk everything. But standing on that sidewalk with my face still burning from Lucy's slap, my career hanging by the thinnest thread because I'd refused to apologize to someone who'd assaulted me, I realized something fundamental had shifted. I was already underneath the bus. There was no safety left to protect, no position left to preserve. I pulled up the archived email and hit reply immediately before I could second-guess the decision. Ms. Wells, I typed quickly, my thumbs moving rapidly across the screen. I'm ready to talk whenever convenient. Let's meet as soon as possible tomorrow. I hit send before rational caution could override my anger and determination. Then I walked to the parking garage, located my car, and drove home through streets that seemed too normal, too ordinary for what I'd just set in motion. I didn't sleep that night. Didn't even make a legitimate attempt. I just sat on my couch in complete darkness, replaying the slap over and over in my mind like a film stuck on repeat. The sound of impact, the eruption of laughter, Ethan's ultimatum delivered with such casual cruelty, the way absolutely everyone just watched without intervening. By the time dawn light began filtering through my blinds, I'd made my final decision. I wasn't going to apologize to anyone. I wasn't going to beg for my job back or plead for understanding. I was going to systematically dismantle everything Ethan had built, piece by careful piece. And when he and Lucy walked into the office the following day, they would have absolutely no idea that the ground beneath their feet was already crumbling, that the earthquake had already started, that their entire comfortable world was about to collapse. Catherine Wells responded to my email at 6:49 in the morning. I know the exact time because I was already awake, staring at my phone screen, wondering if I'd just made the most catastrophic mistake of my entire professional life or the best decision I'd ever commit to. Her message was characteristically brief and direct. Coffee at 10 this morning? There's a cafe called Morrison's on 5th Street. Quiet, private, we can talk freely without concern about being overheard. I showered thoroughly, dried my hair, applied makeup carefully to cover the faint bruising already darkening my cheekbone where Lucy's ring had caught skin. I dressed in clothes that projected professional competence without suggesting I was trying too hard to impress anyone. Dark jeans, a crisp white blouse, a tailored blazer, the kind of outfit that communicates I'm taking this seriously without screaming I'm about to destroy someone's career and life. Morrison's was exactly the type of establishment you'd select for a conversation you didn't want anyone to overhear. Tucked between a dry cleaner and a bookstore that appeared to cater exclusively to customers over 70, dim lighting filtered through dusty windows, mismatched furniture that looked rescued from estate sales, the pervasive smell of burnt coffee and old wood. For tables occupied by people reading newspapers and deliberately minding their own business. Catherine was already seated when I arrived, positioned at a corner table with her back against the wall, commanding a clear view of the entire space. Mid-40s, immaculately tailored charcoal suit, eyes that looked sharp enough to cut through steel. The kind of woman who'd spent an entire career observing powerful people construct elaborate lies and had learned to see through every deception without visible effort. She had a laptop open and a leather notebook filled with handwriting so precise and neat it almost looked typed. A cup of black coffee sat untouched directly in front of her. "Victoria Miles?" she asked as I approached her table. "That's me." She gestured toward the empty chair across from her. "Please sit down. Would you like coffee or anything else?" "I'm fine, thank you." She closed her laptop deliberately and gave me her complete, undivided attention. No preliminary small talk, no gentle easing into difficult topics. "You said you're ready to talk," she began without preamble. "What changed your mind about reaching out?" So I told her absolutely everything. The dinner at Harrington's, the accidental bump that barely qualified as contact, the slap that sent my earring flying across the floor, Lucy screaming at me in front of 60 people while they watched and did nothing. The laughter that erupted from my colleagues like it was the most entertaining thing they'd witnessed all year. Ethan's ultimatum delivered with cold finality. Donna from compliance pulling me aside and instructing me to leave immediately as though I was the problem that needed managing. Catherine listened without interrupting even once, taking notes in quick, precise strokes with a pen that looked expensive. Her expression remained completely neutral throughout my entire account, revealing no shock or sympathy or judgment, just intensely focused attention like she was assembling pieces of an elaborate puzzle she'd been working on for months. When I finally finished, she looked up from her notes. "Do you have any documentation?" she asked directly. "Emails, text messages, anything that demonstrates a clear pattern of this type of behavior from either Ethan or Lucy?" "What kind of behavior specifically?" I asked, needing clarification. "Misconduct, retaliation against employees who question decisions, preferential treatment, misuse of company resources, financial irregularities. Anything that supports a larger pattern of how this organization actually operates behind its polished public image." I thought carefully, mentally scrolling through years of interactions and observations, searching for threads that connected. "Maybe," I said slowly, choosing my words with care. "Ethan has been consistently selective about who receives credit for successful work. And there have been budget discrepancies on several projects I've managed directly. Expenses that didn't align properly with documented work. But nobody ever questioned them because Ethan was too valuable and too well connected to challenge." She leaned forward slightly, her interest visibly sharpening. "Can you access those records for me? Financial documentation, expense reports, anything that shows money moving in ways it shouldn't." "Probably," I acknowledged. "But if I provide that information, I'm finished at core. They'll know immediately it came from me. There's no plausible deniability." "You might already be finished there," she said with blunt honesty. "The only question now is whether you're finished quietly while they protect themselves, or finished in a way that holds genuinely accountable the people who've been breaking rules and exploiting their positions." I looked at her steadily for a long moment, studying her face. She wasn't trying to manipulate or convince me, wasn't applying pressure or making promises she couldn't keep. Just laying out cold reality and allowing me to make my own informed choice. "What happens if I give you this documentation?" I asked directly. "I investigate thoroughly," she replied. "If there's credible evidence of financial impropriety, conflicts of interest, or violations of corporate ethics policies, I compile a comprehensive report and file it with the board of directors. They are legally required to act on findings from an ethics investigation. And if Ethan is implicated in wrongdoing, he will face serious consequences. Termination, possible legal action depending on what exactly we discover." "What about Lucy?" I asked. Catherine's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "She's not a company employee, which makes her more difficult to touch directly through corporate channels. But if we can demonstrate that Ethan provided her with unauthorized access to company resources, client contracts, or funds she had no legitimate entitlement to, that becomes part of his professional misconduct. If we can prove financial fraud or misappropriation, that opens criminal possibilities." I sat back in my chair, processing the full implications. This wasn't simply about extracting revenge for a public slap anymore. This was about pulling one specific thread that might unravel years of carefully concealed problems and corruption. "How long do I have to make a final decision?" I asked. "As long as you need," she replied calmly. "But the longer you wait, the more time they have to cover their tracks and destroy evidence. People like Ethan are exceptionally skilled at that particular skill. They've had years of practice making problems disappear." I nodded slowly, then stood from my chair. "I'll be in touch very soon." She handed me a plain white business card with minimal information. Just her name, a phone number, and an email address. My direct line. Call or message anytime, day or night. I walked out of Morrison's into bright midday sunlight that felt far too normal and ordinary for the magnitude of what I'd just agreed to initiate. I spent the entire weekend thinking obsessively, pacing my apartment endlessly, making lists and diagrams, imagining every possible way this could go catastrophically wrong and destroy what remained of my professional life. By Monday morning, I'd reached my absolute final decision. I was going to the office. I was going to perform my job normally. And I was going to systematically copy every file, every email, every fragment of documentation that might prove Ethan had been operating core like his personal bank account for years. The office felt different when I walked through the doors that Monday morning. Quieter, more tense, like everyone was collectively holding their breath, waiting to see if I'd actually show up or if I'd quietly disappeared over the weekend the way people usually do after public humiliation and threatened termination. I walked in at 8:43, exactly my normal arrival time, carrying my laptop bag and a coffee from the shop across the street. My cheek still displayed faint discoloration where Lucy's ring had broken skin, visible if you looked closely enough. People stared. Some averted their eyes quickly, suddenly fascinated by their computer screens. Others watched me like I was a live explosive device that might detonate without warning at any moment. Ethan's office door was closed. The blinds were drawn completely. I could see his silhouette through the frosted glass, phone pressed against his ear, pacing back and forth in that restless pattern he always displayed when stressed or anxious about something. Lucy wasn't with him, thankfully. Small mercies in otherwise terrible situations. I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, logged into the system and began working. Normal work. Project status updates, client emails requiring responses, timeline revisions for upcoming deliverables. Everything I would normally handle on any typical Monday morning. Because the most effective way to avoid arousing suspicion is to act like absolutely nothing has changed in your routine or behavior. Around 9:45, Donna from compliance appeared at my cubicle entrance. "Victoria," she said, her voice professionally tight, that practiced smile that never reached her eyes. "Can we talk privately for a few minutes?" "Of course." She led me to a small windowless conference room on the third floor. The kind with uncomfortable chairs deliberately designed to make meetings as brief as possible and a faint persistent smell of stale coffee and anxiety. The kind of room where bad news gets delivered behind closed doors away from witnesses. She sat across from me, hands folded carefully on the table, expression meticulously neutral. "About Friday evening," she began. "You mean when I was physically assaulted in front of the entire company?" I interrupted calmly. Her jaw tightened visibly. "That's not precisely how we're characterizing the incident for documentation purposes." "How exactly are you characterizing it then?" I asked. She sighed heavily as though I was being deliberately difficult instead of asking entirely legitimate questions. "Look," she said, lowering her voice conspiratorially like we were allies sharing secrets. Emotions were elevated. "Lucy feels genuinely terrible about how the situation escalated beyond appropriate boundaries. But you also created unnecessary conflict by not de-escalating when provided the clear opportunity." I stared at her in genuine disbelief, allowing the silence to stretch until it became distinctly uncomfortable. "Let me make absolutely certain I understand correctly," I said slowly, articulating each word with precision. "You're telling me that I'm responsible for not de-escalating after someone struck me violently across the face in public?" She didn't respond immediately. Just studied her folded hands like they contained answers she couldn't find elsewhere. "Is Ethan planning to terminate my employment?" I asked directly, cutting through the evasive language. She hesitated, clearly weighing her words carefully. "That depends entirely on how you choose to handle the next several days. He's willing to move past this unfortunate incident if you demonstrate similar willingness." Translation: I thought bitterly. Keep silent. Pretend nothing happened. Allow them to preserve their reputations and perhaps you get to keep your job and paycheck. "I need time to consider my options," I said neutrally. She stood, smoothing her skirt with practiced precision. "Don't take too long deliberating. Ethan needs to know where you stand by the end of this week." After she left, I sat alone in that oppressive windowless room for several minutes, then pulled out my phone. I texted Catherine, "I'm committed. Tell me exactly what documentation you need." Her response arrived within 30 seconds. "Financial records going back at least 2 years. Expense reports, particularly those involving travel or consulting fees. Any communications regarding budget allocations or client billing. Anything demonstrating money moving through channels it shouldn't." Over the following 3 days, I transformed into a ghost haunting my own workplace. I arrived early each morning, stayed late every evening, worked through lunch at my desk. Nobody questioned my dedication because I'd always been that employee, the person who invested extra hours, who obsessed over details, who ensured projects didn't collapse under their own weight. But while everyone assumed I was simply being my characteristically thorough self, I was systematically copying files with methodical precision. Budget reports spanning the previous 2 years. Expense submissions with supporting receipts. Client invoices that didn't align properly with deliverables we'd actually provided. Email threads where Ethan had authorized spending that clearly violated established company policy. I forwarded everything to my personal email account, not my work address that IT could monitor and track. A private account I'd established years earlier for job searching that I'd never actually utilized. And the deeper I excavated, the more evidence I uncovered. Lucy's name appeared on consulting invoices dating back 11 months. Billed to 4 different client accounts. Each listed deliberately vague deliverables like brand strategy consultation and market positioning analysis that had absolutely no supporting documentation. No reports, no presentations, no tangible evidence that any legitimate work had been performed. $72,000 total, paid directly to a limited liability company registered in her name. Travel expenses for trips Ethan and Lucy had taken together. Los Angeles, Chicago, Boston, Seattle. All billed to client projects that had absolutely nothing to do with those geographic locations. The projects they were supposedly supporting were for companies headquartered in completely different cities. Bonuses Ethan had authorized for himself that dramatically exceeded the compensation caps explicitly outlined in his employment contract. Not by small margins, by tens of thousands of dollars that should have triggered immediate scrutiny from finance or the board. Performance evaluations he'd authored for employees who'd questioned his decisions or challenged his authority. Suddenly filled with negative language and criticisms that appeared nowhere in their previous reviews going back years. A deliberate paper trail constructed to justify terminations that would appear obviously retaliatory if anyone bothered examining the pattern closely. It was all there, hiding in plain sight where nobody had thought to look. Nobody had bothered investigating because Ethan was too valuable to question, too skilled at generating revenue, too well connected to board members and influential clients. By Wednesday evening, I possessed everything Catherine needed to build an ironclad case. I compiled it into a single encrypted folder protected by a complex password. Over 240 pages of documentation. Invoices, emails, expense reports, performance reviews, contracts, financial statements. A comprehensive roadmap of misconduct stretching back years. I sent it to Catherine at 11:36 that night from a coffee shop 4 blocks from my apartment, using their public wireless network so there would be no digital trail leading directly back to me. Her response arrived 18 minutes later. This documentation is substantial and damning. More than sufficient to warrant a comprehensive formal investigation. I'll need several days to verify specific details and construct the complete case properly. Maintain normal behavior. Act completely natural. Do not confront anyone about anything. Do not inform anyone what you've done. I didn't. I reported to work Thursday and Friday as though absolutely nothing had changed in my world. Smiled politely at colleagues in hallways. Attended scheduled meetings. Updated project timelines. Responded to client inquiries. Ate lunch at my desk exactly like always. Ethan summoned me to his office late Friday afternoon. Close the door, he instructed when I entered. I complied. He sat behind his massive desk, fingers steepled together, expression carefully unreadable. Calculating. Donna informed me you're still considering how to proceed forward, he began without preamble. I am, I confirmed simply. Victoria, I'm going to be completely transparent with you, he continued, leaning back in his expensive leather chair. What occurred at the dinner was unfortunate and regrettable. Lucy acknowledges she overreacted to the situation. But walking out the way you did, refusing to handle it professionally, created a significantly larger problem than necessary. I said nothing. Simply waited for him to continue. I'm prepared to put this entire incident behind us permanently, he said, watching my face carefully for reactions. But I need absolute certainty you're not going to transform this into some prolonged human resources nightmare that damages the firm's reputation. I need to know you're a team player who understands how these situations get resolved quietly. What specifically does that mean? I asked evenly. It means you acknowledge it was an unfortunate misunderstanding between colleagues. You move forward professionally. We all move forward. The firm moves forward. Everyone benefits. I studied Ethan's polished facade, expensive suit, perfect haircut, that smug confidence of someone who'd never faced real consequences. I'll consider it over the weekend and let you know Monday, I said calmly. He nodded, satisfied. Excellent. Let's put this behind us and focus on the work. I left, returned to my desk and counted the minutes until 5 p.m. That evening Catherine called. The documentation is worse than I imagined. Systemic financial misconduct spanning years. I'm presenting to the audit committee Monday at 9 a.m. What happens to me? You're protected under federal whistleblower law. Retaliation would bring regulators down on them like a hammer. She paused. You showed real courage. Most people stay silent. I stayed silent for 7 years, I said. Look where it got me. It got you in position to stop them, she replied. That matters. Monday morning I arrived before dawn. Government sedans were already in the executive lot. By 9:12 whispers flooded the office. Investigators upstairs, Ethan locked in his office. By 10:40 his assistant walked out carrying a box, face tear-streaked. By 11:15 security blocked the executive wing. At noon, Donna called an emergency all-staff meeting. Voice trembling she announced, Ethan Foster is no longer employed with CORE, effective immediately. The room exploded in hushed chaos. Someone asked if it was tied to Friday's dinner. Donna's eyes flicked to me, then away. I can't comment. Stephanie found me after. Did you know this was coming? No, I lied. You're terrible at lying, she said. But whatever you did, it was right. By week's end 2 more execs were escorted out, Lucy's contracts voided and Donna placed on leave. The office felt like a ship after a storm, shaken but still floating. Catherine called that weekend, it's over. Ethan's fired with no severance. Lucy's under fraud investigation. And you're untouchable. Helena Ross, the new interim CO, wants to meet. I'd expect a promotion. He was right. Tuesday Helena offered me Ethan's role, Senior Director of Strategy and Operations, $168,000 full benefits and a formal apology from the board. I'll accept, I said. A month later I sat in my office, his old one, when a message popped up from Lucy. I know what you did. You destroyed everything. I deleted it. Because justice isn't about having the last word. It's about building something better in the ruins of what was corrupt. Ethan's gone. Lucy's facing charges. The people who laughed now step aside in hallways. Me. I sleep soundly knowing I didn't just survive their cruelty, I ended it. Sometimes one slap doesn't just bruise a face. It collapses an empire. And the person who got slapped. She walks away victorious,